The town of Black Hollow was a place of secrets, cloaked in mist and shadow. Once a thriving mining town, its riches had long since been exhausted, leaving behind a skeleton of what once was. The people who remained were quiet, their gazes haunted, as if they bore the weight of something unseen. No one new ever came to Black Hollow. No one ever left. Emma had heard the stories. She had grown up hearing whispers about the cursed town, tales of people disappearing, of strange occurrences that defied explanation. But stories were just that, stories. She was a journalist, driven by facts and evidence, not by superstition. So when the opportunity arose to investigate the town for a feature, she jumped at the chance. A deep dive into Black Hollow's mysteries could make her career. She arrived late in the afternoon, her car struggling up the winding, narrow road that led into the heart of the town. The landscape was bleak, the trees bare and gnarled, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The air was thick with fog, muffling sound and distorting shapes. By the time she reached the town square, night had begun to fall, and an unnatural stillness settled over the streets. The inn where she had arranged to stay was an old, creaking structure that seemed to groan with the weight of its years. The innkeeper, a wiry man with deep-set eyes, gave her a wary look as she checked in. "You're here to write about the Hollow, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Emma nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "We don't get visitors, especially not ones with cameras and notebooks. Let me give you some advice, stick to the daylight. The fog isn't safe after dark." She laughed nervously. "The fog? What's so dangerous about a little mist?" He didn't answer, just gave her a look that made her skin crawl. The first night. Emma's room was small but functional, with a single window overlooking the empty street below. As she unpacked, she glanced out at the town, shrouded in the thickening fog. The streetlights flickered, their glow feeble against the encroaching darkness. She dismissed the innkeeper's warning as small-town superstition, the kind of folklore that made for a great story. Her plan was to explore the town the following morning, but curiosity got the better of her. Armed with her camera and flashlight, she ventured out into the night. The air was heavy and cold, each breath forming a cloud in front of her face. The fog clung to her, damp and oppressive, muffling every sound except the crunch of her boots on the gravel. The streets were deserted, the buildings dark and silent. As she walked, she felt an inexplicable sense of unease, as if she were being watched. Several times, she thought she saw movement in the fog, fleeting shapes that vanished the moment she turned her flashlight toward them. Dismissing it as her imagination, she pressed on. She reached the edge of the town square, where a crumbling statue of a miner stood, his pickaxe raised high. Beneath the statue was a plaque, the inscription worn and barely legible. As she leaned closer to read it, she heard it for the first time, a faint whisper, barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. "Leave." Emma froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Hello?" she called, her voice shaky. There was no response, only the oppressive silence of the fog. She hurried back to the inn, her heart pounding. Once inside, she bolted the door and climbed into bed, convincing herself it was just the wind. But as she lay there, the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, seeping through the walls like smoke. The investigation. The next morning, Emma set out to learn more about the town. She interviewed the locals, though few were willing to talk. Those who did spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously toward the windows. They told her about the mines, about how the town had prospered until an accident claimed the lives of dozens of miners. After that, things began to change. The fog came, thicker and more persistent, and with it, the whispers. One elderly woman, Mrs. Carver, was more forthcoming than the others. She invited Emma into her home, a cluttered space filled with faded photographs and antique furniture. The mines were cursed, Mrs. Carver said, her voice trembling. They dug too deep, disturbed something that should have been left alone. The men who died, they never really left. Emma's skepticism wavered. You think the whispers are spirits? Mrs. Carver nodded. Spirits, or something worse. They're trapped, angry. The fog is their prison, and they want out. They'll try to lure you in, make you one of them. Despite herself, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. But she was determined to uncover the truth. That night, she returned to the square, this time heading toward the old mine entrance on the outskirts of town. The descent. The mine was sealed off, a rusted gate barring the entrance, but Emma found a gap wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the jagged walls and rotting timbers that supported the tunnel. The whispers began almost immediately, louder now, echoing off the walls. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding her, drawing her deeper into the mine. Turn back. Help us. Stay with us. She pressed on, her pulse pounding in her ears. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder with each step. She felt a presence behind her, but every time she turned, there was nothing there. Just the dark, and the whispers. Finally, she reached a cavern where the ground opened into a yawning abyss. At the edge stood an altar, crude and ancient, covered in strange symbols carved into the stone. On the altar lay a lantern, its light flickering eerily despite there being no visible source of flame. As she approached, the whispers grew deafening, a chaotic symphony of voices screaming and pleading. Her head throbbed, her vision blurred. She felt an overwhelming urge to step closer to the abyss, to peer into its depths. Suddenly, the whispers ceased, replaced by a low, guttural growl. A shadow rose from the abyss, towering and shapeless, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Eyes, hundreds of them, glowed within the darkness, fixing on her with a malevolence that made her knees buckle. You should not have come, the shadow said, its voice a deep rumble that reverberated through the cavern. Emma turned and ran, the tunnel twisting and narrowing as if the mine itself were alive, trying to trap her. The whispers pursued her, mingling with the growl of the shadow. She stumbled out of the mine just as the first light of dawn broke through the fog. The revelation. Emma left Black Hollow the next day, but the whispers followed her. No matter where she went, they were there, faint at first but growing louder with each passing day. She tried to write her story, to warn others about the town and its secrets, but every time she typed the words, her computer would crash, her notes would vanish. Then, one night, the fog came to her. It seeped under her door, filling her apartment with its damp chill. The whispers grew louder, until they were all she could hear. And then, silence. Emma was never seen again. Her apartment was found empty, her belongings untouched. The only sign she had ever been there was her laptop, left open on the desk. On the screen was a single line of text. The fog has taken her, and it will take you. Leave Black Hollow alone.